So on your screen, you see the quick agenda. That's me, Adam. You guys are muted. We'll do the Q&A. And we're going to dive right into what CPACE is all about. This specific webinar is on retrofits. The first two have been on new construction and a general introduction. So if you're thinking about those topics and we're not covering them, I'll refer you back to the prior meetings. In waiting and on hold, if you will, we have available for Q&A, we have Mary Rose Martinez from the Philadelphia Energy Authority. We have Tim Davis from White & Williams, and we have our primary host today, Tamer Jamil from my team here at Counterpoint. So you'll hear mostly one voice throughout the presentation, but there's a lot of people who can answer questions, okay? So about the program, you guys have seen this before, anyone who's attended the last two calls. PACE is a public-private partnership. The main crux of it is the 100% financing for energy saving and sustainable measures that you can put into your commercial buildings. In the last bullet there is about the length and the term, which you guys are probably familiar with by this point, but it runs with the effective useful life of the equipment that is being installed. Okay, PACE is not new. It is new-ish to Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania market, but it exists around the nation, as we've told you before. The little red dots are where the Counterpoint team does some administrative work, which is the role that Philadelphia Energy Authority plays in Philadelphia, and the Sustainable Energy Fund plays in the rest of parts of Pennsylvania. The little blue dots are White & Williams offices, in case you guys need a good lawyer. You've heard Mary Rose talk about Pennsylvania market and how it's developing. It's in the major metropolitan areas in Philadelphia. That's good news. There's a lot of gray there, and Mary Rose has made the cry on the prior two calls, so I'll just plug for her here. If you are aware of a project can often lead to what we call an opt-in, meaning when someone wants to go forward with a project, that can push a local governing body to accept the PACE program and to get it up and running. So often we lead with projects, and that's how you get a market activated. So let us know, anyone on the call at any point in time, if there's something that could turn something from gray to green. We'd love to see that. Also nearby, obviously Delaware has a new program, Virginia has a new program, New Jersey's working on theirs, New York State is working on theirs. It's active, counties and whatnot. So without further ado, I will pass the microphone to Tamer Jamil from the Counterpoint team.
Thank you, Adam. So a lot of this is, you might have heard about this, and what this slide does is it provides a good visual. And what Adam mentioned earlier is PACE is a newish product, even though it's been around for the past 10 years. But what this does is it lines up PACE with the traditional loan product and highlights the differences. So the first thing and the most important thing is that PACE provides 100% financing, whereas certain other loan products require the borrower to contribute equity. So generally in loans, there is an equity component, whereas with PACE, it's 100% financing. PACE is de-linked from the credit profile of the borrower or the business, and I say that with a caveat. So think of PACE as a loan to the property. As long as there is enough equity in the property, that property will generally qualify for PACE. But as underwriters, one is diligent, and they also look at the business profile of the profile of the business to make sure it's performing. But generally, the fundamental premise of PACE is that it is de-linked from the credit of the owner or the business. PACE offers long-term financing up to 30 years, depending on the jurisdiction, and the rates are locked in. Currently, depending on the size of the project and the type of the property, the rates are anywhere from 5.5% to 7%. PACE is transferable, as I mentioned earlier. I don't think I mentioned, but PACE is a loan to the property. So, if the property is sold, the new owner inherits the PACE payment, just like the property taxes. If the property is sold, the new owner is responsible for property taxes. A few other things PACE can be off balance sheet. It can receive off balance sheet treatment. Again, that is something we generally recommend that you consult with your accountants or your financial advisors. There may be an ability to pass the cost of the PACE to tenants, particularly for multi-tenant properties. If the property owner has a triple net lease or a gross modified lease, there might be an ability to pass on the PACE to the tenants. And the last thing, no personal guarantee. Again, it's linked to the credit profile of the. It's linked to that element that this is a loan to the property. It is not a loan to the borrower or the business. Hence, there is not a personal guarantee requirement. If you can go to the next slide, Adam. So this is a use case that PACE is really ideal for a deep retrofit or a repositioning. And as we'll see on the next slide, you can get some basic parameters on PACE, but PACE can, for a traditional gut rehab, it can cover a vast variety of energy improvements that may include the building envelope, HVAC, renewable energy, efficient lighting, related and affiliated work. So it's again, it's really great for deep repositioning. And importantly, from a property owner's perspective, it's 100% financing without the need for a personal guarantee and without the need to take on more expensive mezzanine financing and shorter-term financing. The other thing, which again relates to the previous slide, is PACE can go out to 25 or 30 years depending on jurisdiction, and it is an amortizing loan. So there is no refinancing risk or a balloon payment that is generally present in other loan products. Next slide, please. This is a sampling of some of the things that can be financed with PACE. Again, anything that makes a property more energy efficient, more resilient, more sustainable can qualify for PACE. So that can range from solar, wind energy, the building envelope, to efficient windows and doors, to a green roof, efficient HVAC. So it's really there is the PACE administrator has tremendous discretion in determining what can qualify for energy efficiency, and this is just a sampling of what can be financed. We have a much more detailed document available on our website that provides a list of all the things that can be financed with PACE. So again, I mentioned renewable energy improvements, a solar installation, for example, a small wind turbine, charging stations. If the roof needs to be strengthened to put solar on the roof, that roofing, that cost can also be rolled into the PACE. So, renewable energy, these sort of projects are quite prevalent in California, in the Bay Area, in Southern California. So we've seen PACE being used for a lot of renewable energy improvements. And again, throughout the country, seismic retrofits, water conservation, flood mitigation, these are all improvements that can be financed with PACE.
And a little plug from the organizers of this webinar series. The fourth webinar is really a dive into the renewable energy solar projects and the availability of green roofs, in Philadelphia and whatnot. So we're looking to have some guests that have expertise on those installations. So that's why there's that little arrow there about the May 12th webinar. You'll see a little follow-up. In the follow-up email to this session, you will receive an invitation to that session. But a little preview is that's what's baked in there. That's why we're not diving into it at this current time during this webinar. Part 3, I should call it. Part 4 is the real green stuff. Okay. Back to you, Tamer.
Okay, so if you go to the next slide, this is an illustrative term sheet for a typical PACE financing. we talked about earlier that it can be used for a bunch of energy efficiency, sustainability improvements for a property. But the punchline really is, if a property owner decides to use PACE, what is the dollar amount of proceeds that the property owner can borrow? So PACE can be anywhere from 15% up to 35% of the value of the property. Again, that is a function of the property type as well as the jurisdiction. To give you an example, in San Francisco, a multifamily property, the advance rates on PACE can be up to 35%, whereas for a specialized property such as a manufacturing facility or a hotel, the advance rates may be lower, perhaps 15 or 20%. If I were to take a numerical example on a property that's valued at $1 million, PACE can be up to $350,000, whereas the PACE plus the mortgage cannot be more than $950,000. So the mortgage cannot be more than $600,000 in this particular example. Again, in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, the thresholds may be different, but really the punchline is that the PACE can be up to 35%, and the PACE plus the mortgage can be up to 95%. So as you look at opportunities and projects, this is a quick way for you to size the potential PACE proceeds that can be had from a particular property. Just in terms of how the process works with Counterpoint, from the point, the first part is making sure that the property is in a PACE-enabled jurisdiction and it's eligible. We run that check. That's fairly quick. And from the point we get all the information and documents that are required for our underwriting process, it's generally a 4 to 6 week process for the underwriting to be done and the funds to for funds to be available for closing. From the point we get all the documentation, that includes ownership documents, mortgage documents, project information, etc., etc. It generally takes us about 4 to 6 weeks to synthesize that information, and we can make funds available in about 6 weeks. And at that time, funds can be dispersed to the contractor or the property owner. The unique thing about PACE is that at closing, funds are deposited into an escrow account. So the funds are there, and we will work with the contractor and the property owner to schedule milestone payments. These generally range from 3 to 4 payments over the duration of the project. In solar, for example, at closing, we will disperse about 50 to 60% of the funds to order the equipment. So that would be the first milestone payment. The second milestone payment will be at substantial completion, which is where the installation is, the panels have been installed and are about ready to be hooked up to the grid. And the final installation of the payment is at PTO, the permission to operate. So we generally hold back about 10% until we get that letter from the utility. So that's solar, but in any other type of rehab project or new construction project, we will work with the property owner and the contractor to devise a schedule of milestone payments, and we have flexibility on how we go about that. This just came across the wire on CNBC. I think it was Simon that is opening up its malls, and given sort of where the current environment, PACE is quite an ideal product to make the improvements that will be necessary going forward. But we wanted to provide you with a case study of a mall that used $4.5 million in CPACE financing to essentially install more energy efficient HVAC and chillers and new lighting throughout the mall. So again, a prime example of Washington Prime. Prior to the crisis, Washington Prime had, and probably maybe still does, but before the crisis, before the COVID crisis, they had access to cheap capital. And the reason they chose to use PACE was because they had an ability to pass on the cost of the PACE to their tenants. Most of the leases are triple net or gross modified leases, so they were able to pass the cost of that to the tenants. So why borrow money when you can at LIBOR or at a certain rate when you can borrow it for free and have your tenants pay for it? Another type of property that we financed, this was again a deep retrofit of a nursing facility. They used 3.7 million in PACE financing to, I think it was HVAC, and really sort of put a new an HVAC system in the facility.
Yeah, this was this is Adam interrupting again. Because there's a green arrow, those are the times I will interrupt. So we're going to dive into this case study, ironically, on also May 12th, which is the date of the other Philadelphia, Pennsylvania webinar. A few of our team members are speaking as part of a U.S. Green Building Council panel that's coming out of Florida. And so in the invitation after this meeting, which you're totally going to be looking forward to now that I've plugged it 3 times during one conference, will be some information about this other webinar that dives into this project. This project it began with HVAC for a build out on some new floors of, some refurbished floors of this building. But what the owner was able to realize using PACE was a really expansive, to make the project larger and to do more with what was initially HVAC and what in Florida is mandated emergency generator equipment. So what we saw there and what that example and what that exploration will be on that May 12th conference will be a discussion with Train, who was the contractor, the installer, the energy services provider, and the building owner, and some of the technical guys that were involved in that project. And we'll be looking at, how you can see PACE as something that can take a small project where maybe you were entering to fix one thing, and now there's the availability for funds to do more than you originally were setting out to do. So it's a fun project, so stay tuned on that one. I do see a question coming in, we'll get to that. I'm going to give Tamer the next slide here.
So this was another, or here we go. This is, when we did this transaction, this was the largest PACE financing. When we did this, it was approximately 50 million in PACE proceeds for a bunch of hospital facilities. And this is, again, an example of PACE being used on a retroactive basis. Again, Adam, do you know, was it 2 years or a year?
It was in California. So in California, there's a 3-year look back. Wow, we covered this in the first presentation, Mary Rose, but I'm forgetting in Philadelphia, I believe it's 3 years, right? I see you.
We got 2 years. In PA and Philly programs, 2 years.
That's right. Okay. Thank you.
So, PACE it's a great tool. And again, it makes sense in the current environment where, everyone is in a difficult predicament, and particularly for property owners, if they want to take equity off the table, the look-back financing that PACE affords, it's a great option to consider. But in this particular example, the PACE was used for a bunch of improvements that you see on the screen, and we were able to get lender consent from a very large bank, one of the largest banks in the country. So, they understood the value of PACE and they provide lender consent. This is again almost a 1.8 million PACE financing for a Hilton hotel, I believe, and the proceeds were used to for a bunch of things, including the building envelope, HVAC, lighting, renewable energy, and again, the low cost of capital was instrumental here for them. And the unique thing about hotels is, depending on the jurisdiction, the hotel may be able to pass the cost of the PACE as in the form of a green tax to their guests. So this is done, it's very common in California. We've seen that in Texas. I don't know if that's being done here, but I don't know if that will be allowed in Pennsylvania, but it is allowed in other jurisdictions.
We have reached the good part. So we get to explore questions and answers. And there was one question that already came in vis-a-vis the chat. Hopefully you all saw that. It was from Ben Block. And Ben is asking, thanks for coming to our webinar, Ben, for retroactive financing of retrofit projects where the project involves installing new ECMs, how do the programs define completed installation? And then this is important to know which projects fit within the timing window for eligibility. So I think since Mary Rose already chimed in without much introduction, thank you, Mary Rose. We'll pass that microphone to Mary Rose for a quick answer, and then maybe we can address other markets. But I think this is a Philly, Pennsylvania question. So go for it.
Sure, Ben. This is an interesting question. So on just straight up retroactive financing, we have a 2-year look back, and the 2 years sort of starts at the completion of the installation or construction as proven by the date on the certificate of occupancy or other acceptable construction completion documentation. But I guess what you're saying here is combining a new project with the old project. So I would say that we haven't had that question yet, but the retroactive component of the project has to still adhere to the 2-year look back based on the C of O or other documentation. And then the newer ECMs don't have that same restriction.
Yeah. Roughly, there would be no question about the newer ECMs. So
yeah,
what's done, how done is it, is the question. So we're seeing a similar, that question come up in a lot of other markets, and it's always best to check with the program administrator or the capital provider that you're working with. So in this case, anyone on this call would be perfect. Are there other questions from our audience? We'll wait a few seconds and see what's up.
I actually had a question for Timur to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit. Based on the deals that you've seen kind of across the country and deals that you've closed, do you see most retrofits are sort of single measured with just a chiller or just the HVAC system, or multi-measure comprehensive retrofits for buildings? And how would you say that breaks down between the deals you've done?
Tamer, you want?
I'll take that. It's actually it depends. If you take in San Francisco, for example, right, because of the soft story retrofits, so those repositionings have just been single measure. But even out of those, right, probably about 20% of them have, since they were already using the program, they decided to broaden the scope of things they wanted to do. So there is no sort of set tone of whether it's individual. I think the property owners who realize that, look, the value of PACE, they tend to broaden the scope a bit more. But I think 80% probably are single measure, and the remaining 20% include multiple measures.
Yeah, and in my experience, and to speaking to that Victoria nursing home that we'll be addressing with the USGBC, it often in the ones where it involves multi-measure, it often started with one, right? I was on a different webinar last week with Tamer, and we were discussing a person who had acquired a new warehouse, and basically they had a leaky roof, and they were thinking, how can I pay for this? I wasn't expecting to have to invest all this in the roof. They found out about the PACE program. They ended up, it was this Connecticut-based property, so they needed to meet the I forget the acronym right now, but they put solar on the project to basically get the cash flows to work right. So you had one retrofit need leading to another measure being added to a project. So it's interesting to see how that plays out market by market, but often it'll be one measure leading to others. I see another question coming in from Ben. Thanks, Ben. is retroactive only available for new construction? And he's clarifying, my question was more along the lines of if it's an ECM in an older building, and the ECM was started in 2017, completed in 2018, would that be eligible?
Retroactive financing is available for new construction and retrofits in the Philly program. So if you had an ECM in an older building that was completed in the past 2 years, then it would be eligible for retroactive financing. So depends on exactly your timing for 2018. And one thing to note is that, you know, if there was a project that was completed, if there was a new construction project that was completed in 2018 before the 2018 code took effect in Philadelphia, so that new construction project was completed under a prior code, then the code exceedance requirements are different for that new construction project as compared to the new construction projects being completed today under a more rigorous code. But since your question is really about ECMs in older buildings, I'll kind of stop it there.
Thank you, Mary Rose. Okay, so we'll do the old 10-second pause and see if there's any more questions from the audience, and then we'll begin to wrap things up. So fire in your questions by chat. Hopefully you see Ben's on your screen. We're welcome to others participating. All right. I'm going to assume it's safe to conclude the conference. Thank you guys for joining. You will get an email tomorrow or so that shares out the copy of this presentation with the notification of the sort of deeper look into the solar and the green roof projects that could happen in the Philadelphia and Pennsylvania market. That webinar is on the 12th. You will also get some kind of notice about that USGBC one that's taking a deeper look at that nursing home in Florida, where, like we mentioned, one retrofit led to more. So thank you guys. Thank you to my panelists. Tim Davis, we did not hear from you, but we loved that you were here. He's our representative from White Williams today. Tim, you want to say goodbye to everybody since I saw you unmute yourself?
Yeah, Adam, Tamer, and Mary Rose, as always, A+. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you guys, and thank you everybody for dropping in. Appreciate it.
Thank you all so much.